How many of you, when you feel like you're doing something with God, feel like you are doing it on your own? Right? When it's just you and Jesus, when you are having to rely on just Him and His help, how often does that kind of feel like a letdown because you feel like, oh, well, I've got to do it all alone? If it's just me and Jesus, if I'm surrendering this to God, it means like now I've got to handle it on my own. So often I feel like that, if we're all being honest with ourselves, is what happens. I was just speaking to a friend about this, and I pulled up our exchange here because she was telling me about this realization. You know, we have this long back and forth voice notes that we do to one another, and I had just shared a voice note with her, and she, as she was listening, she said, you know what, as I'm listening to this, it just reminds me that I don't have to carry it all. And that when she's like, I want that. There's a part of me that so desperately wants to not have to carry it all. But she said, I realize that when I will surrender things up to God, or when I say I'm trusting God, that there's a big part of me that resists that resists it, because there's a part of her that feels like, oh my gosh, if I'm giving it to God, it means I'm doing it alone. And how many of you guys, if you're honest with yourself, have said, I'm there, I've been there before? Most of us. I know I can say that. It's funny because I actually, not that long ago, I remember having this conversation with God, and I was like, God, I know so clearly that what you're telling me is that I'm giving too much power to other people because I'm hungry. You know, when I was building a team, it was like, oh, I just kept saying things will be easy once I find that new team member. And guess what? Found a team member, and things weren't easy. And then I was like, no, it's because it's not the right one. How do you really find the right one? And then it became, oh, well, if I just could find the right mentor, oh, if I could just, learn the right thing, or no, whatever. There's always going to be that one more, right? We're all going to have that one more thing that some parts of our brain think, oh, when this happens, everything's going to be okay. Everything will be easy. But there is no such thing. Like, the real easy thing is not, like, what makes life easy is seeing clearly the reality in front of us, right? And that's a hard thing because it takes disciplining the flesh, right? It takes operating counterculturally and rejecting time and time again all the different messages that we have our whole human lives on this earth been trained to believe as truth, right? And so this idea that, oh, I'm surrendering it to God, that means I'm not getting my answer from my mother or my father or my friends or my teachers or my partner, right? Whoever you go to for advice, you're saying, oh, well, I'm going to go to God. And it can feel like we're alone because we want that tangible person. And this is where I had that conversation with God some time ago, where I was like, God, I know that in all these things that you've been showing me where I've been making other people or things idols, because an idol is anything that you place before your obedience to God, right? And God, I know you're telling me this is just about you and me. This is just about you and me. Just spend your time with me. Spend your time with me. And all the rest will fall into place. And I can know that and hear it so clearly. And yet a part of me didn't really like that answer. Not because I actually didn't like it, but because my flesh struggled to feel held, since I wanted that extra hand, like a physical, tangible hand. And how often do we do the same, right? That's what this conversation with me and my friend were about, where she said, I noticed myself resisting this idea, but then she said, it's reality. She's like, I don't have to carry it all on my own. why do I resist this when it is reality? The reality is we do not have to carry everything on our own, and yet we resist the idea. Why? Because part of us thinks that we're going to be doing things on our own when we surrender to God. And she had said, when we allow God to work on our behalf, it doesn't mean that we're doing things on our own. Why? Because God brings other people. And this is where the whole kind of meat of this conversation landed. She was talking about a vision that she had for her life, and she said, well, I don't even know how it's gonna work. How could I get money for this? And as I was listening to her, I was reflecting back, you know what, I keep sensing the same thing. I've told you time and time again that I really see you just stepping out into this arena and spending more of your time, and over the coming, or over the months of, it was probably earlier in the year, I got this vision of just her doing this work that was not what her work has been. And it's not something that she currently gets paid for, or that she had even fully engaged ever before, but just, I don't know. And we'd come back to these conversations where, she'd talk about different things in this arena, that when she'd give herself permission to do them, and she'd just light up. And I'd say, there you are again. You're just lighting up. I really see you moving into this arena, and what would it look like to give yourself that permission? And this time, as she was speaking, I'm like, you mentioned how you're not getting money for this, but you just want to do it anyways. And in that whole line of her saying, well, this doesn't make money, she had said, oh, we just got a funder who is funding this project. And so I'm like, wait a minute, you're saying you're not getting paid, but you have funding. And I said, who knows? I said, I could see God just blowing you away with as you begin stepping into this more and more, and you're already getting funding. Imagine what is going to be done when they have your support. And then once they have your support, because they haven't had anyone take real leadership in this, volunteer initiative before. And now that they do, they're able to put more manpower, get some funding. Once they see, wow, this is what we could do, who knows what more funding might come. And when they realize, oh, well, we're gonna need more than volunteers, who's to say that maybe they don't put aside a little piece of that budget and say this goes towards a coordinator or a manager for whatever we want to launch. And if you've already been showing up in that leadership, maybe it's you. And I said, I don't know if that's what God has or not, but it's who are we to just write these things off? And this is what I personally, want to start leaning more into. And so she was, just really reflecting how, when we allow God to work on our behalf, it doesn't mean that we're alone, right? It doesn't mean okay, great. I know, God, you got me, but I've got a lot of things I need to do physically, and I wish I had actually physically more hands. And God's not saying, oh, because I'm, a spirit, I'm not gonna bring hands. He finds ways to bring hands. And even beyond that, he finds ways to not need hands. Right? Where it's oh, but I've got this, art project I need to do. And then you think, oh, you've got to have a bunch of people working on this mural. But then maybe there's a new technology that you're gifted with that allows you to create murals in, half the time with one person. Who knows? I don't know. All I'm trying to say is I just wanted to come back and speak a few words about this idea that when we surrender to God and give up these things that we've been wrestling with, knowing that and believing and choosing to trust that God is fully fighting for us, walking with us, operating on behalf of us, we're not doing the work on our own. It doesn't mean, okay, God's got me, I just need to pray harder. God's got me, I just need to, force myself to hear more clearly and then he'll show. Or No, God works in so many ways, and he can bring extra people to support you. He works through people, and I'm always reminded of how like everything God does is for maximum impact. And in this conversation with a friend, we went on to explore a variety of different things, but one of the other things that came up was she shared with me this imagery that somebody else had shared with her around looking at like our spiritual walks with God as baking a cake, and how often do we, we get antsy and we're like, let me just check. Let me just open the oven and check to see if the cake is ready. And that actually disturbs the process. It makes it take longer, or sometimes it doesn't even take longer, but depending on what we're cooking, it could ruin the whole thing, right? Because now it's got air bubbles or whatever. I don't know, not air bubbles, but you know what I mean. And so like, we just need to trust that like, there's a reason why we bake things in the oven. The oven does its work and it heats things up, and we don't always have to be looking or poking or testing. We could just put it in there and go off trusting that it's gonna cook. Have our timer on, and when the timer's up, come back and trust that it's gonna be okay. Right? And a big part of that invitation, as I was hearing her share this, I was like, yes, I love this imagery, because it's really saying like, how do we lean into trusting God's process, even when we would like it quicker? But then God showed me a whole extra layer to this, is how often do we rush this because we're focused on the cake as the outcome. I want the cake. The cake is so amazing. It's going to taste good, and I want to eat it now. But if God is a God who is focused on multiplication and having the biggest impact with whatever he does, then who's to say the cake is the thing, the answer, right? Because that only feeds us. So what if it was never about the cake at all? What if waiting those 45 minutes for the cake to cook was because we needed to be at that house an extra 45 minutes? If we would have had a cake done in 1 minute, we would have then run out the house and maybe ran our errands, and we were supposed to connect with somebody, maybe meet our future spouse, and we didn't meet that person because we were 45 minutes early to the grocery store that we were going to meet them at, right? Or what if that delay, air quote delay, because it's not really a delay, but like you really waiting and trusting that, what if that, saved you from a pileup, or like there's just so many things that God is doing that we are not even aware of, because his plan is so much greater. What if it wasn't about you, but who you could bless? Right? Maybe you thought you wanted that cake because you were really going to eat it, and then because you had to wait for it, right? Or whatever you were baking, because you had to wait for it, you said, oh, that the lust of the eyes grew less eager. And so then by the time it was finished, you were like, oh, wow, I could share this with someone. And you invited some friends over. And so now it allowed that process, and giving room for that process to do whatever it needed to do. Wasn't just about making this the best cake, most delicious thing, but it was also about teaching you that things are enjoyed more when they're shared, right? And now everyone got to eat, and everyone got to, be nurtured, get nutrients from this food, right? Whatever it is. Anyways, I thought I would just jump on and share that, because it was just a nice little reminder on my heart. And so I bring it back to you just as an invitation to think about, where in your life is God saying, I'm with you in this? And you kind of resisting, but God, I know you keep saying you got me and you're gonna handle the bills, but like just show me the money. Like, just get me the job. Just bring me the person. And then all my problems will be gone. And God's like, no, I am the way, the truth, and the life. All right, your stability doesn't come from finances, doesn't come from a job, doesn't come from a home, doesn't come from a partner. Those are all wonderful things that often help us feel more rooted, more supported, more able to move about our daily lives, and they are not the source. Only God is the source. And until we get to that place of just unconscious Christ consciousness, where it's no longer this efforting, but it's just, we just operate from this oneness. God will keep doing that work, that baking, that refining. And we just have to keep trusting that the process is here for a reason, and it's molding you into something so amazing that is not about you just being an amazing person, but it is about what God wants to do in and through you in that baking, in that development, in that refining fire. So if you notice any area of your life where you've been, just asking God to provide, to come alongside you and offer support, and you've been making that support very specific, I want to encourage you and invite you right now just to apologize. Say, God, I love you and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for putting my agenda on this and making it about my will. And then surrendering it and saying, Lord, I want your will. I trust that your ways are so much greater than mine. And so have your way and help me to feel that tangibly. All right? So when we think, oh, this means I'm doing it on my own now, I don't